You're going to that facility whether you like it or not." He stood there by the dining room window, arms crossed, like he expected me to burst into tears or fall to my knees and beg him. But I didn't do a thing. I didn't move a muscle or say a single word. I just kept watching him. I silently wondered if this was really the son I had raised. The same one I had nursed with cracked, sore breasts. The one who used to sleep clinging to my robe when he had nightmares. How does blood turn so ice cold? I didn't answer him, not because I didn't have the words, but because if I opened my mouth my whole soul would just come spilling out. He scoffed, clearly annoyed by my silence, and said that he couldn't keep supporting me, that I was just complicating his life, that his wife was tired of it all, that this wasn't a life for anyone, as if I was just a burden, like an overdue bill, like an old box that was cluttering up the living room. He told me all of it without even raising his voice, with that calm tone that hurts even worse than screaming. All I could think was, what did I ever do to deserve this? But he, and no one else for that matter, has any idea what a mother keeps locked up inside. I walked into the kitchen like nothing was wrong. I boiled some water and made myself some coffee. My hands were shaking, not because I was scared, but from the incredible strength it took not to just break down and cry. I sat down at the table and slowly took a sip from my mug. I could hear his voice coming from the next room as he talked on the phone with someone. He said that the assisted living place had an opening, that he would take care of everything, that it would all be resolved in just 2 days. 2 days? That's how little I'm worth to him. That all it takes is 2 days to get rid of me. I gripped the rim of the mug tightly. I thought back to all the years. All of them. The good times, the bad times, the times when I ate less so that he could have more. The nights that I stayed up taking care of his asthma, his fears, his own personal demons. All of it. Everything that I was and everything I gave now just amounted to a decision being made without me even having a say. I knew that this day was coming. Not exactly like this, not with those exact words, but I had felt it in the way that Marcus had been looking at me for months, like I bothered him even when I was just breathing. I had noticed it during mealtimes when we barely spoke to each other, in how he would close his bedroom door the second I walked past, in how his wife treated me like a houseguest whose stay was almost over. But that phrase was the final blow. When he walked back into the kitchen, I had finished my coffee. I asked him in a quiet voice if he wanted me to make him dinner. He looked confused, like he was thrown off. Maybe he was expecting a different kind of reaction. Maybe he was hoping to see me on my knees, screaming and begging him not to do it. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I didn't make him anything. I went to my room, closed the door carefully behind me, sat down on the bed, and right there in that moment, in the middle of the night that was just beginning, I made the decision that if anyone was going to make decisions about my life, that person was going to be me. Marcus doesn't know who I am or who I used to be or everything it cost me to get to this point. He conveniently forgets that I had a life long before I was his mother. That I wasn't born old or frail or tired. That I once had dreams, that I used to dance in the rain, that I loved fiercely, that my heart was broken into pieces, that I started all over again, and that I built everything that he now wants to take away from me. He forgets that this house doesn't even belong to him, that I built this house with my own 2 hands. I worked for 30 years as the manager of a local bakery, clocking in 6 days a week just to be able to pay for every single brick, every window pane, every flower that's in the yard. I only ever slept for 4 hours a night. I never asked for anything, not even a thank you. But of course memory is pretty selective when it suits you. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I lay there looking up at the ceiling, remembering every little detail of my life. The first day I saw this lot when it was just dirt and hope. The day that I brought newborn Marcus home wrapped up in a yellow blanket. The Christmases, the laughter, the fights, the makeups, everything was stored inside these walls. And now he wants to put me in some institution like I'm some kind of prisoner. I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt like hell, but because I wasn't about to give him my tears. The next morning I woke up before everyone else. I prepared breakfast like always. Marcus came downstairs with his usual expression, that mix of being in a hurry and being distant. He told me that he had to go out and handle some paperwork and that we would talk about it later. I just nodded. When he left, I went to the closet, but not to pack any clothes. Not yet anyway. I was going for something else. A small box made of dark wood that I had kept for years and years. Inside were my most important documents, the deeds, my will, and some savings that nobody even knew that I had. It wasn't a whole lot, but it was enough to get by. There were also letters, photographs, old newspaper clippings. I sat down on the bed with the box on my lap, and for the first time in a really long time I smiled. He thinks that I'm weak. He thinks that he can just decide things for me, but he has absolutely no idea everything that I've been through and what I'm really capable of. I closed the box again. I put it back where it belonged. I had to act calm and collected, intelligently. It wasn't time to show my hand just yet, but the game had started and this time I was going to be the one moving the pieces around. That night I pretended to be tired. I went to bed early. From my room I could hear Marcus talking to his wife. They were saying that the place was nice, that it even had a garden, that it was well kept, like they were describing some fancy resort hotel, as if a mother was just some object that you could put up on a shelf. I pulled the blanket up to my neck, not to protect myself from the cold, but to protect myself from their contempt. The thought of leaving didn't even hurt anymore. What hurt was that they actually believed that they could just decide it without me, but they were about to find out. The next week was going to change everything, and this time I was going to have the final say. I remember the exact day that Marcus was born. It was like the sky knew that something really important was about to happen. The doctor told me that he took a deep breath from the very first second, like he was demanding the entire world with that first cry. And I, foolish me, thought that that meant strength, that meant life. I never imagined that it was also a warning sign. From the time he was a little boy, Marcus was a very demanding child, one of those who doesn't cry because he's hungry, but because of a whim, who isn't satisfied with what he already has, but instead wants what isn't even his. But I, with that blind love that a first-time mother has, went way out of my way to try to please him. I worked extra hours running my alterations business to buy him the designer sneakers that all the neighborhood kids wanted. I went into debt just to pay for a spot at the private academy, believing that it would keep him away from bad habits and negative influences. I swallowed my tears and my sleepless nights just to see him succeed. When his father, my husband Robert, passed away, Marcus was only 15 years old. It was a really hard blow for both of us. But what hurt me the most wasn't the grief. It was the way that Marcus started to look at me as if I suddenly didn't know anything at all. As if he, with his voice changing and his shoulders getting broader, was suddenly the man of the house, and I was just a shadow of what he needed. Don't cry so much, Mom. He had to die of something. He told me one night when I was still clutching Robert's pillow. From then on, things just kept changing. He didn't consult me about anything. He would go out without even saying where he was going. He spoke to me like I was his housekeeper, his burden, his source of annoyance. But even still, I just couldn't stop justifying his actions. It's just adolescence, I'd repeat to myself over and over again. He's hurting from his father's death. And I just kept on preparing his favorite foods. I kept washing his clothes. I kept on hoping that one day he would hug me again like he used to when he was just a child. But that hug never came back. Years passed. Marcus grew up, became a successful business executive, got a good job in the city, and moved out. I stayed in this house that we built together with so much sacrifice, brick by brick, back when Robert was still alive. Every corner of this place holds a story, a memory, a scar. I thought that when Marcus was well established, he would come back, not to live here, but just to visit, to share a cup of coffee, to show me that he cared about how I was doing. But the calls just became more and more sporadic, the messages completely non-existent. And when he actually did come over, it was always in a hurry. He barely even said hello, would just glance at his watch and then leave. But what hurt the most wasn't the coldness. It was the way he surveyed the house. Like someone who was already measuring what they were going to take once the owner finally died. One day, without any warning, he told me, "Mom, you should start thinking about selling this place. The house is getting old, and you can't keep it up all by yourself." He said it without even looking me in the eye. Like it didn't even hurt him, like he didn't know that this house was the last thing that I had left of Robert, of our shared history, of myself. I didn't answer him. I just nodded in silence and poured him some more coffee. After that, the pressure just started building. Calls every single week. Mom, did you go to the notary yet? Mom, I have a friend who wants to invest in real estate. Mom, this isn't anything personal. It's just for your own good. And every single time I hung up the phone, I felt like a part of me was just peeling away like a flower that had been ripped from its stem. I clung to my routine, my plants, my sewing, my walks around the neighborhood. But the shadow of his ambition was already in every single corner of my house. Every time I opened a drawer, I felt like I was just preparing to disappear. Until one afternoon, while I was watering the rose bushes, I saw him arrive. His brand new car, his office suit, his expensive cologne, and his hard, cold face. I've already spoken to Attorney Sterling. Mom, if you don't sign the papers, I'll be forced to take other measures. This house is going to be mine whether you like it or not. That's when something broke. But it didn't break in me, it broke in him. Because while he was saying all of that, I didn't cry. I didn't get upset or angry. I just kept watching him. And in that silence, I think that for the very first time, he understood that he no longer had any power over me. That the Thelma that he thought was fragile no longer even existed. That night, I locked myself in my room. I pulled out the ledger where I keep track of every single expense that I've had since Robert died. How much did Marcus's education cost? How much did I invest in this house? How many times did I give up buying something for myself just to give it to him instead? Every single figure was like a wound, every number was like a betrayal. And in that early morning, I understood something that hurt even more than everything else. My own son didn't love me. He just needed me to die so that he could inherit everything. That's when I made my decision. I was not going to give him anything. Not a wall, not a chair, not even a flower pot. The next morning I went to the market. I walked the streets like I always do, but with a brand new perspective, as if every single step was part of a secret plan that was just beginning to be born. I saw Miss Evelyn Reed, the retired notary public. I greeted her and asked her, "Are you still doing estate work?" She looked at me with a bit of surprise and then with a lot of respect. "Of course I am, Thelma. That's what I do." That's where my preparation began. I gathered all of my documents, the property titles, and the payment receipts. I found all of my records, the deeds, even the old letter where Robert stated that the house would always be mine unconditionally. Weeks passed by. Marcus didn't call. All the better for me. I also kept my mouth shut, because sometimes the greatest act of rebellion that you can do is to not say anything at all. Until a month later, he came back with his arrogant tone, with his sense of urgency. "Mom, I've made the decision for you. You're going to that facility whether you want to or not." That's when I finally knew. It wasn't just ambition that was driving him. It was also contempt. And that was the final straw for me. I came home that afternoon with a tight throat like I had swallowed a rock, and could never ever get it back out. There was something in the air, something that wasn't new, but that had become even denser, even more evident, like a fog that wasn't even trying to hide itself anymore. It was the contempt, Marcus's contempt, my own son's contempt. I felt it in the plates that he left on the table without clearing them. In the way that his voice rose in tone every time that he spoke to me. In the way that he avoided looking me in the eye as if I was nothing more than just another object in the house. And that night was different because he didn't yell. He didn't throw anything down onto the floor. He didn't insult me directly. It was even worse than all of that. He simply sat across from me in the dining room while I finished serving dinner. He just looked at me in silence with a calm that froze my blood. "I've already spoken to Mr. Dawson," he said suddenly, cutting into his meat without even looking up. "Everything is all set. This house will be in my name, and you're going to that facility whether you want to or not." I didn't respond to him. Not even a sigh, not even a tear. I took my napkin and placed it on my lap with the same slow movements that I always used. I felt something inside of me just shrink away as if my soul was just shriveling up in fear. But I still didn't say anything because in that silence, I was also deciding something for myself. I didn't sleep a wink that night either. I walked through the hallway from one end all the way to the other. Shadows stretched along the walls as if the house itself was watching me. How did we even get to this point? I wondered when my own son had turned into someone who was capable of looking at his own mother, as if she was just a nuisance to him. But questions weren't enough anymore. The very next day, I started doing something that I hadn't done in years: writing. I took out an old notebook and started jotting down dates, names, facts, as if my life was just a file that needed to be carefully scrutinized. I remembered the original deed to the house, the documents that were kept inside a locked box deep in my closet. And I also remembered something else as well. I hadn't signed anything just yet. That transfer hadn't happened. Legally speaking, that house was still mine. And if he really thought that I was just going to hand it over to him like some old rag, then he didn't know me at all. Not well enough anyway. I started small at first. I sold some antique silverware that I had inherited from my own mother. Then I sold some jewelry that had been stored away for decades, all in complete silence. All without even raising any suspicion. Marcus just thought that I was still the same old submissive woman who washed his clothes and served his breakfast without a single complaint. But no, not anymore. The day before his next visit with the attorney, I overheard him talking on the phone on the patio. He didn't even know that I was standing right behind the curtain listening to him. Yeah, it's all set up and ready to go. The old lady isn't saying anything. She just cooks and walks around like a ghost. No problem at all. We'll sign the papers in a week and then I can start with all of the renovations. I'm going to gut that whole entire kitchen. I didn't cry, but that phrase right there, the old lady, that's what he was calling me. Not mom. Not my mother. Not the woman who gave me life. Just the old lady. And right there in that exact instant, I knew that there was no more time left to waste. I had to protect the little bit of myself that was left, the part that he wasn't going to destroy. I got up bright and early the next morning and went to the bank. I opened up a brand new account under a different name. I took precautions that I had never even taken before in my life. I changed all of my passwords, saved copies of my documents in different places, and reread the house deed line by line as if it was some kind of tragic novel. And right there, in that rereading, I found a little detail that I had completely forgotten about. A clause that actually allowed me to nullify any change if I could prove any kind of coercion or abuse. I guarded that particular page like it was worth its weight in gold. The humiliations just kept on coming. Marcus never even tired of them. Every single day, he had some new way of making me feel small. Sometimes he would simply ignore me altogether. Other times he would just come in with grocery bags and drop them down forcefully onto the table, as if I was just his employee. Not a single word, just orders, just cutting stares. One night, when the tension in the air was so thick that you could almost chew it, I made his favorite meal, smothered pork chops and rice, just like I used to when he was just a little boy. I thought, with my lingering naivety, that by tasting it, he would maybe remember something, some kind of happy moment, some laughter, some hug from the days when he was still a child with small hands seeking refuge in my skirt. But no, he just took a spoonful, tasted it just once and then said with disdain, "This is bland, just like you." I just froze, not because of the phrase that he used, but because in his tone there wasn't even any anger anymore. It was total and absolute indifference, as if I no longer even existed in his world. And that's when I decided that I just couldn't keep going through all of this alone by myself. I thought of someone, the only person who always spoke to me with some kind of kindness whenever we ran into each other at the market, even though it had been years since we had actually sat down and talked. Serena Hayes, the neighbor down the street, the one who had taken care of her sick mother until her very last breath, the one who had offered me help more than once whenever she saw me carrying bags all alone. We weren't really all that close, but there was just a light in her that made me feel like there was still something good left in this world. I went to go find her. I walked all the way to her house with my heart pounding in my chest. And when she opened the door with her hair pulled back and her apron covered in flowers, I simply said, "I really need to talk, and I just don't know who else that I can turn to." She let me come inside without asking any questions. I sat down in her kitchen, which smelled like freshly baked bread. And I just let everything out, every single word, every invisible blow, every night of silence, every gesture of contempt. Serena just listened without even interrupting me. She didn't offer me any cheap comfort. She just took my hand when I was finally finished and said something that still echoes in my memory to this day. You're not alone. And you don't have to give your entire life to someone who just doesn't value it. That day, something just shifted inside of me. I returned home a completely different person. I no longer walked with my back all hunched over or my shoulders slumped down. I felt as if for the very first time in a really long time, I actually had a plan, a real one, and one that was completely my own. And Marcus noticed it. He looked at me with narrowed eyes as if he suspected something was going on, but he didn't say anything to me. He just frowned and went right back to checking his phone. I, on the other hand, just smiled to myself because I knew that his time was running out and mine was just beginning. Serena kept her word. She didn't just listen to me that one time. She started visiting me frequently, quietly, as if she knew that any whisper in this house could suddenly turn into dynamite. She would bring me homemade bread. Sometimes she would just sit there with me on the patio watching the leaves falling. And little by little, she just became a constant presence in my life. A companionship that didn't even require that many words. Her way of just being there for me was such a welcome relief amidst so much shadow. One afternoon, while we were preparing some strong black coffee together, she looked at me with those tranquil eyes of hers and said something to me that really startled me. Thelma, if you decide that you want to leave, I'll help you go anywhere that you want to go. You don't need to tell me exactly when. Just tell me that you're actually going to do it. I didn't answer her right away. I just watched the steam rising up from the pot as if it held all of my thoughts. But inside of me, something was really igniting. For the first time, I really felt like I could not only escape from all of this, but that I could also start all over again. That night in my room, I opened the drawer where I kept all of my important papers. I pulled out the deed to the house and just looked at it for a long, long time. There was my name written in black ink, Thelma Price. It was all mine. Everything was still in order. I hadn't yielded anything to anyone. Not yet anyway, and I wouldn't. I began gathering everything that I would need in order to disappear completely. My documents, some money that I took out slowly without raising any suspicion. My birth certificate, my bank books, an old gold chain that had belonged to my grandmother. I hid everything inside an empty cookie tin that I kept under a false bottom in my dresser. No one would even know it was there. In the meantime, I just played the part. I kept setting the table like usual, cooking without any enthusiasm at all, but also without making any mistakes. Marcus seemed distracted, more preoccupied with his phone calls, with his investment plans, with the renovations that he was already imagining for a house that wasn't even his yet. But I also began to notice a very disturbing detail as well. He was checking up on me. Sometimes he would come into my room without even warning me, using the excuse that he was just looking for a pen, or asking me if I had seen his keys. He would stay a few seconds longer than he needed to, as if he was inspecting something. His eyes would sweep all over the drawers, the shelves. He was looking for evidence of something. He didn't even know what exactly, but I definitely felt like I was being watched. That's why I started being even more careful than ever before. I started memorizing all of the places where I kept my things, taking photos with my old phone in case someone moved them around. Everything had to be precisely measured, every gesture, every word that I spoke. It was right around then that Serena offered me a possibility that I hadn't even considered. My cousin actually lives near Asheville, North Carolina. She has a small, quiet little place. She doesn't ask too many questions. Would you want to start out there? I just remained silent. The name just resonated inside of my mind like a distant echo. Asheville. It wasn't just the place that mattered. It was the promise of it. A new atmosphere. A new Thelma. And how exactly would I even get there? I asked softly. I'll drive you, she said without any hesitation at all. That's when we decided that the departure had to be precise, fast, with no margin for error. The plan started to take shape in my mind. One Friday morning, while Marcus was at his weekly meeting with attorney Sterling, I would slip out of the back door with a single suitcase and meet Serena right there on the corner. She would have everything all prepared, the car, the route, the silence. I was committed to a single goal. To leave everything in order before I left. That he would find the house intact, clean, just like an empty inheritance. Just the furniture and the walls, nothing else. Because I had already started selling all of the valuable objects little by little. I sold off the bigger, less obvious items. The ones he wouldn't even notice were gone until he actually needed them. My mother's porcelain dinnerware set was the first to go. Then a collection of heirloom black folk art. And an oil painting that had been hanging in the hallway for 20 years. Each sale felt like a small goodbye. A piece of my history that I was letting go of, with a mixture of sadness and freedom. I carefully tucked the money in envelopes inside a hidden compartment in my purse. If things went according to plan, I'd have enough to live comfortably for a while without having to depend on or ask anything from anyone. But as the days went by, Marcus became increasingly jumpy. One afternoon he turned to me and asked, "Have you been to the bank recently?" Without so much as a flicker of emotion, I denied it. "Why do you ask?" "I don't know. I just have this feeling that something's not quite right. I want to make sure you're not signing any documents without telling me." The irony was almost too much to bear. He, who was secretly plotting to steal the house right out from under me, was suddenly worried that I might be up to something. "I don't have anything to sign, Marcus. You know I don't handle those kinds of matters anymore," I said, knowing full well that I was lying. His eyes seemed to bore right through me, but he didn't push the issue any further. Then, just 2 days before my planned escape, something completely unexpected happened. A minor accident, really. I was putting the last of the papers back into my hidden box when a receipt slipped out and fell to the floor. Marcus walked in at that exact moment and saw it before I could snatch it up. He grabbed it. It was a receipt for the sale of an antique figurine. It didn't have my name on it, but it did have a delivery address. "What's this?" he demanded. "Oh, that? It's something old. I just found it in a box." "It's nothing," I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity. Then, without saying a word, he placed the receipt on the table and walked out. He didn't come home to sleep that night. Serena called me as soon as she found out. "We're moving things up. We can't take the risk." And that was that. The day before I was originally planning to leave, I packed my belongings into a single suitcase. I left a letter on the dining room table, carefully placed under a vase. It wasn't a loving farewell by any means. It was a declaration. I explained that the house didn't belong to him, that I hadn't signed any documents, and that he no longer had my permission or my silence. "Everything you destroyed in this house," I wrote, "can't be fixed with new walls. And now that I'm leaving, you will finally understand that a mother's presence is worth more than any amount of money." That was my final sentence. I didn't sign it with love. I simply signed my name, Thelma Price. When Serena arrived to pick me up, I didn't shed a single tear. I closed the door firmly behind me and refused to look back. The sky was heavy with thick clouds, but I could feel something like the sun on my skin. Freedom. We drove away in her car without any music. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in years I didn't care where I was going. All that mattered was that I wouldn't be returning, and that the monster I raised would finally have to learn to live without me. The car moved slowly along the back road, flanked by tall trees swaying in the gentle breeze. Serena kept both hands firmly on the steering wheel, and I gazed out the window as if I were seeing life for the very first time. The house was behind me. Marcus was behind me. And so was that broken version of myself that had endured far too much. Neither of us said a word. Sometimes silence doesn't need to be filled. My silence was overflowing with images, with phrases I had never uttered, with cries I had swallowed down for years. Serena's silence, I believe, was the silence of someone who understood the weight of everything that was being left behind. But as we drove toward the horizon, back in that house I had left intact like an empty shell, Marcus was returning to his gilded prison. He parked his car in the driveway without noticing anything out of the ordinary. He walked inside, still talking on the phone with that sharp, cutting voice he always used to close deals that were never quite what they seemed. He strode through the living room, oblivious to the vase or the letter underneath. He poured himself a glass of water, kicked off his shoes into a corner, and slumped down into the armchair. That's when it hit him. The silence. But it was a different kind of silence than usual, not the quiet of a mother who's simply gotten used to being quiet. It was a heavier, deeper silence, a void, an echo. He got up and walked through the house, calling my name 2 or 3 times. Nothing. He went upstairs and found the bedroom completely empty. Not messy, not ransacked, just empty, as if the very soul of the room had departed. He walked back downstairs slowly, and as he passed the table, he finally noticed the letter. He read it standing up, his brow furrowed in confusion at first, then with rage, then with disbelief, and finally with that look that men get when they never imagined that something would actually abandon them. He tore the letter into pieces, threw them on the floor, and kicked the vase, which shattered against the wall. "You have no right!" He screamed at nothing, at a woman who was no longer there to hear him. He checked the closet, opened the drawers, and discovered that things were missing. Jewelry, important papers, the folders with the house deed, the envelopes of money. Everything was gone. For the first time in his adult life he felt fear. Not the fear of losing property, but the fear of having lost control. He called my phone once, twice, 20 times, always hearing the same message. "The number you have dialed is not available." He called his contacts, but nobody knew anything, or at least nobody was willing to say. He even tried calling Serena, whom he had always profoundly underestimated. She didn't answer. And that's where the real breakdown began. For days he wandered around the house like a furious ghost. He rewrote the letter in his mind over and over, filled with rage. He told himself that I would come back, that it was just a tantrum, that I couldn't possibly live without him, that I was too old to start over. But with every night he spent alone, every cup of coffee he had to make himself, every shirt he found unironed, a bothersome certainty settled into his skin. This time I wouldn't be coming back. That's when he started to investigate. He went to the bank, reviewed the transactions, and saw that money was indeed missing, small sums that had been withdrawn over a period of weeks. He had never even noticed. He always just thought I was a little clumsy. It never occurred to him that I could possibly hide anything from him. He went to see Attorney Dawson and demanded to know if there had been any legal activity concerning the property. Dawson, clearly uncomfortable, told him that I had requested a certified copy of the deed. Nothing more than that. No signatures, no donations, nothing at all. "So it's still in her name?" he asked, his voice strained. "Yes, everything still legally belongs to your mother. If you try to sell it without her signature," Dawson raised an eyebrow, "you can't. Legally, you have absolutely no right to do so." And that was it. Marcus finally understood that he hadn't just lost me. He had underestimated me. He started talking to the neighbors, asking about any friends I might have, but nobody said a word. He even went to Serena's house and knocked on the door, but no one answered. He knew that she had also been gone for several days, which only fueled his rage even further. He started drinking, not violently, not like in the movies. He did it in silence, sitting in front of the television, which was tuned to channels he wasn't even watching. Bottles emptied without a sound. Food tasted like nothing. Days passed without any purpose. And in that abyss, he began to see the house with different eyes. At first it had been his trophy, his early inheritance. But now it was a prison with walls that constantly reminded him that he didn't know how to wash his own clothes or cook a meal, or even sleep without someone there to turn down the volume on the television. One morning he woke up and found the living room covered in dust. He realized that the refrigerator was completely empty. There wasn't any coffee left, and the bathroom smelled stale. That's when he finally burst into tears. Not a childish cry, not a loud, dramatic one. It was a low, almost shameful cry, a whimper between clenched teeth, because for the first time, he felt something he had never imagined he would feel. Abandonment. And that was the real revenge. Not the papers, not the money, not the letter, but the absence. My absence. That mother who had always been there, even when he didn't deserve my company. The one who had endured his contempt disguised as jokes, his orders disguised as advice, and his coldness disguised as care. I hadn't abandoned the house. I had abandoned the weight. I had let go of my executioner, and that disarmed him completely because no matter how much he screamed, how angry he became, or how much he sought revenge, he couldn't force me to come back. And every night, as he locked up the house with all the lights off and the television chattering to itself, he understood a little more clearly the final sentence of my letter. A mother's presence is worth more than any amount of money, and that presence was no longer his. We arrived at the edge of town just as the sky was starting to be painted with deep shades of orange. It wasn't a tourist destination, and it didn't have a lot of charm. It was quiet, silent, just enough for a broken woman like me to learn to breathe again. Serena turned off the car's engine and looked at me with that familiar expression of hers, a mixture of tenderness and strength. She didn't say anything, letting me take my time. I got out of the car slowly. My legs were shaking, not from weakness, but because every step I took was a conscious decision. Every step was an act of rebellion against years of emotional subjugation. I walked across the threshold of the small one-story house that we had rented sight unseen. It didn't have any luxuries, but it didn't have any ghosts either. And that's exactly what I needed. The air inside smelled of old wood and fresh cleaning supplies. The windows were open, letting in the gentle murmur of the wind. I stepped onto the floor like someone who had finally found solid ground after a shipwreck. I sat down in the single dining room chair and let out a low, unexpected, almost hysterical laugh. Serena poured me a glass of water and sat down across from me. "You're here," she said, as if I had just won an Olympic medal. And in a way I had. "Yes," I replied. "I'm here." I didn't sleep that night, not because I was uncomfortable, but because my body simply didn't know what to do with so much silence. There were no footsteps in the hallway, no passive-aggressive comments, no judgmental stares, just the night and me. And that was my first truly free night of insomnia. The following days were awkward. Learning to live without fear takes time. The first few times I went to the market, I walked around looking at everyone as if they were danger in disguise. It was hard to smile, not because I didn't want to, but because I had simply forgotten how to smile from the inside out. Serena was patient. She accompanied me, gave me space when I needed it. Sometimes she cooked for me without asking. Other times she simply read in silence while I stared blankly at the wall, not even knowing what I was thinking. And little by little, the house began to smell like coffee in the morning. The plants she brought from the nursery started to bloom. One day, a neighbor named Martha knocked on the door to offer us some freshly baked bread. I smiled awkwardly, not knowing if that was dangerous or not. But Serena gently squeezed my arm, reminding me that I had finally climbed out of the well. One afternoon, while I was watering the pots on the patio, I realized that I was humming a song. I couldn't even remember what song it was, but it was mine. My mind was singing it without my permission. And right there I knew that something inside me was starting to come back. It wasn't happiness yet. It was presence. For the first time I felt truly present in my own life. But there were also dark moments. Nightmares in which Marcus was yelling at me. Memories of plates being shattered on the floor. Of entire days when he wouldn't speak to me because he couldn't find his keys. The time he had said to me, "You're a burden, Mom. If it weren't for me, you'd be living on the streets." Those phrases don't go away easily. They get under your skin like invisible needles. And yet, every time I woke up from one of those nightmares, Serena was there. Sometimes with a cup of tea, other times simply with her silence. She never asked me to get over anything. She just allowed me to be broken without making it a problem. One afternoon, I decided to walk alone to the town's lookout point. It was early. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, and the air had that scent of wet earth that always made me feel alive. I climbed the hill slowly without rushing. Step by step I felt every muscle, every breath, as if my body were rebuilding itself. From the top I saw the world with different eyes. Thelma Price was no longer the woman who had to ask permission just to exist. Now she was someone who had chosen to disappear from a place where she wasn't loved. I didn't regret it. I thought about selling the house and using the money to travel, to live peacefully with Serena, and to finally give myself the years that he had never allowed me to have. And I would do it because it was mine. Because for the first time everything I had, my body, my decisions, my affections, was also mine. And at that instant the wind blew hard as if life itself were whispering to me, "You are exactly where you need to be." It wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was emotional justice. Marcus would learn, if he ever wanted to, that a mother isn't eternal, and that you can't stomp on a heart and expect it to keep beating for you. I no longer beat for him. I beat for me. Marcus couldn't pinpoint exactly when he began to feel that the house no longer belonged to him. At first he tried to pretend that it was just temporary. He told himself that I was overreacting, that I just needed some time to calm down, and that I would come crawling back as soon as I got over my little fit of foolishness. But as the days passed and I still didn't return, the silence began to multiply in the corners of the house. It was no longer simply an absence. It was a sentence. The kitchen woke up cold. There was no smell of coffee brewing. No one opened the windows to let in the fresh air. Dust began to settle like a guest who knew he wouldn't be asked to leave anytime soon. The house, without my presence, became inhospitable to him. And for Marcus that was incomprehensible, because all his life he had seen me as nothing more than a useful piece of furniture, an extension of the house itself, a kind of mindless entity that simply served him without question. He didn't understand that the soul of that home was me, and that when I left I took it with me. Serena watched me in silence every morning. She knew that something inside me was slowly reordering itself. We didn't talk about Marcus much, but we both knew that he was trying to track my shadow. He did it through missed calls, messages that I never answered, and rumors that reached me like distant echoes. He had gone to the bank, to the notary, and even to the house of a distant cousin, hoping that someone knew where I was. But I remained invisible, not out of fear, but out of sheer dignity. One random afternoon while I was walking with Serena through the local market, I spotted an indoor plant that I had always liked, an intertwined ivy with strong, vibrant green leaves. I bought it without even thinking about it. When we got home, I placed it on a shelf by the window where the morning sun would shine on it. I surprised myself by talking to it as I arranged it. "You're going to be just fine here." And so am I. That night I dreamed of Marcus. But he wasn't the rude authoritarian man who constantly yelled at me and told me that I was ruining everything. He was a child. He was crying in an empty bedroom, surrounded by broken toys, asking me why I had left him. I woke up with a strange mix of guilt and liberation because even though I had left him alone, it was also true that he had left me alone for years. The days went by, and with them came more news of his decline. A mutual acquaintance, the husband of a neighbor who still kept in touch with him, told me that Marcus was no longer going to work. He was living locked up inside the house, constantly in a bad mood, yelling on the phone at anyone who dared to mention my name. He had started drinking heavily, and they had even found him asleep on the couch one time, surrounded by empty bottles with the television on, playing a cooking show. The same one I used to watch every afternoon. His arrogance had begun to crumble. Without me, he had no one to blame for his frustrations. There was no one to demand solutions from. There was no one to humiliate in order to make himself feel bigger. And for the first time he had to truly inhabit himself, and he simply didn't know how. I received a handwritten letter. It had no return address, but I immediately recognized the handwriting. It was from him. A clumsy attempt at an apology mixed with pleas and manipulation, all disguised as concern. He said things like, "I don't understand why you had to do it this way. We could have talked about it. I'm suffering too." But not a single line said, "I mistreated you. I invalidated you. I hurt you." There wasn't even a hint of true introspection, just a carefully crafted chain of phrases designed to make me revolve back into his orbit. I tore the letter into tiny pieces. I burned them in the sink and watched the ashes disappear into the air. It was the first time in years that I felt true relief. I didn't need his approval or his forgiveness. He had no power over me, not even with his words. Meanwhile, the sale of the house was moving forward. The real estate agent, a kind man in his 50s, asked me several times if I was absolutely sure about selling it, pointing out that it was a valuable property, that I could rent it out, or that I could even come back to it someday. But every time I thought about it, a single image came to mind. Me hunched over in a corner, listening to Marcus yell as he broke plates and reminded me that nobody lived for free. That house was no longer a home. It was a wound with a roof over it. I decided to sell it, plain and simple. I just signed the papers and asked for all the money to be transferred to a new account that no one but me had access to. Serena accompanied me to the bank. She didn't say a word, but she held my hand while we waited. That simple gesture gave me more strength than 1,000 speeches ever could. With that money, I didn't plan to buy another house. I didn't need possessions. I planned to live, to visit all the places I had always dreamed of seeing but never could. Maybe Italy, maybe Oaxaca. I wanted to learn to dance, to swim without fear. I wanted to laugh without asking for permission. But above all else, I wanted Marcus to know that I had sold everything, that there was nothing left for him, and that the house he thought he would inherit now belonged to another family. Every tile, every door, every piece of furniture was no longer his because he had never truly cared for them. He had always believed that simply deserving something was enough. They told me that when he found out, he completely lost it. He went to the house to try to stop everything, but it was already empty. The new owners had already painted the walls and thrown out all the old furniture. There was no trace of my life left there. And he, standing in the middle of the yard, shouted my name like an angry child whose toy had been taken away. He called my phone, but I had already changed my number. He wrote emails that were never delivered. He searched for me as one searches for a ghost, because that's what I was to him now. A phantom who had left, taking the very air with her. One evening, Serena prepared a special dinner for me. There was shrimp and grits, homemade bread, and a sweet wine. We toasted to everything that was lost, to everything that I would never carry again, and to everything that I had finally released. That night, as I listened to her talk about her plans to open a small embroidery workshop, I thought that perhaps not everything that's broken has to hurt. Some cracks can actually be paths to the light. Marcus would keep searching for me, not because he loved me, but because he didn't know how to live without someone to dominate. And I was no longer willing to be that person for anyone. I had never felt the air so light as I did that morning in Savannah, Georgia. I woke up without any of the usual jolts, without that familiar pressure in my chest that had accompanied me for so many years. For the first time in a long time, I didn't hear any voices demanding things from me. I didn't feel any heavy footsteps in the hallway. I wasn't afraid to open my eyes. I opened the window and let the sun gently brush my face. It was soft, almost warm, like a new caress. I took a deep breath. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally knew that a new life had begun, my own. Serena had already left for the market early that morning. She left me a note written in blue ink on the table. Today, I'm bringing buttermilk biscuits and good coffee. I promise. I smiled. Not because of the biscuits or the coffee, but because someone had thought of me with kindness. And after a lifetime of silence and orders, that is worth more than any treasure in the world. The days passed slowly, as they must when one is healing. I learned to walk slowly, to stop and admire the trees, to look at the sky without having to worry about the clock. Serena taught me to swim again, not in the sea but in life itself. She let me take naps and put on music from her youth. We cooked together and sometimes we cried together too, but with that kind of cry that cleanses, not the kind that drowns. Not everything was easy, of course. I discovered broken parts of myself that I didn't even know existed. Sometimes I found myself staring at a wall in silence, remembering things that hurt, like old thorns that had never fully healed. Other times I woke up with Marcus's name on my lips, not knowing if it was rage, sadness, or just habit, because that's just how it is. You can't reprogram your heart overnight. But I was no longer afraid of those memories. I had gained something stronger than fear, the certainty that I had finally chosen myself. Finally, one day as we were walking along the riverfront park, Serena asked me if I missed the house. I thought about it for a long time. I missed the woman that I had been there. The one who had endured, the one who had crawled to give everything. But not the house itself. No, I had sold it without looking back because I finally understood that bricks and mortar aren't worth more than peace of mind. And it was true. I didn't regret it. I had been liberated. Marcus called me one more time. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His tone was cold but disguised as courtesy. "Mother, we should talk. There are things that aren't clear." I didn't respond because yes, everything was clear, perfectly clear. He wanted to know how much money I had left. He wanted to. I wanted to make sure he wasn't completely left out of the will. He still harbored the desire to control something, anything. But I wasn't the same woman who once cried at the mere threat of the facility. Now I slept with the doors wide open, and I walked forward without ever looking back. Every time I shared coffee with Serena on the terrace, every time I felt the wind gently playing with my graying hair, I knew without a doubt that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. One evening as the sun was setting, I wrote a letter, not with the intention of sending it to him, but to finally liberate myself. "Marcus, you weren't born inherently bad. You were born mine." And that was what cut the deepest because at some point, I genuinely believed that you would love me with the same unwavering strength with which I had always protected you. But it wasn't meant to be. You treated me as if I were just another piece of old furniture, something to be discarded. You saw me as nothing more than a burden, a hindrance. You wanted to lock me away, out of sight, out of mind. You spoke to me with such contempt, and yet it was so unbelievably hard for me to let go of you. But eventually I did. You owe me absolutely nothing, and I owe you nothing in return. My debt was to myself and the woman I wanted to be, and I have finally paid it in full. Don't concern yourself with my will. Everything is already resolved. You won't be receiving anything of monetary value. But I am leaving you something far more significant, something that carries far more weight than any inheritance could ever offer. It's the profound silence of a mother who departed without any resentment lingering in her heart, but also without even a single glance backward. Hopefully one day, if life shakes you hard enough, you will remember this moment. No amount of money can ever truly replace a living, breathing mother. I am no longer there for you, and I will not be returning. Thelma. I placed the letter carefully inside a box and buried it near the garden of the house I shared with Serena. Not to keep it hidden away from the world, but as someone burying a life she no longer wished to carry with her. Months later I found myself meeting new people, forging new connections. Women who had also bravely fled from similar stories, similar circumstances. Women who had learned, albeit late in life, the power and importance of saying no. We would gather together for tea, walk peacefully along the shore, and share our deepest secrets with each other, just like big girls. We laughed until our stomachs hurt, we cried until we couldn't cry anymore. And above all else, we supported one another through thick and thin. One of them, Estelle, told me one afternoon, "Thelma, you are incredibly brave." I couldn't help but laugh. "No, Estelle, I'm simply tired of not truly being myself." And she was absolutely right. I didn't become rich or famous in the traditional sense. I didn't open a foundation or write groundbreaking books that would change the world. I didn't do anything extraordinary, except for the most difficult thing of all, learning to live without the heavy weight of guilt constantly weighing me down. I learned to dance all by myself, to eat without feeling rushed, to look at my reflection in the mirror without immediately searching for every single flaw, to listen intently to my own inner voice and trust its guidance, to sleep peacefully at night with a calm heart. And at my age, that feels like a monumental revolution. I no longer find myself wondering what might have happened if Marcus had loved me differently, because I finally understand that love, if it has to be begged for, ultimately becomes a prison. Today I walk with a lighter step. Today I am no longer consumed by fear. Today I know in my heart that I was a mother. But I am also a woman first and foremost. And above all else I am finally unequivocally free. Because one day, I was forced to make an impossible choice between being placed in a facility and unquestioningly obeying. And I, without uttering a single word of protest, chose silence in that moment, and then I chose life. I sold everything I owned, not out of revenge, but to remind him and myself that a mother's presence in your life is worth far more than any amount of money could ever be. And if he ever hears my name spoken aloud, let it not be for what I gave him, but for what I was no longer willing to lose. Thelma Price, woman, mother, and now finally the sole owner of herself. Did you like my story? If you listened all the way to the very end, drop a 1 in the comments section below. If you enjoyed it, you can support me by liking the video and sending a small tip my way. I've got tons of other real-life stories just like this one on my channel, so make sure to subscribe and check them out when you have a chance. I've added 2 new stories on the screen right now that everyone seems to love. Thanks so much for being here with me. See you in the next one with more stories.